Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Bilingual Professor podcast. 大家好，我叫王浩文博士, Dr. Kevin Wong, trained elementary school teacher, now teacher, educator, and researcher, and apparently a podcaster by night once 啲小朋友瞓覺, the kids go to bed. Last episode, we went after the confusion myth, the idea that bilingual children get cognitively confused. And I showed you that with cognitive science, why that interpretation is almost precisely the opposite of what's actually happening in a bilingual brain. Today, we go after a different myth, one that lives closer to home because this one is about parents. It sounds like this. My Korean is too rusty. My Tagalog sounds like a kid's. My Spanish is embarrassing. I don't want to teach them the wrong thing, or I mix too much English. If I'm not a real speaker of this language, how can I raise a real speaker? And I want to name what is actually underneath all those statements because it's more than just doubt. It's shame. An internalized shame about a language that is yours that you've come to believe is somehow not enough, not real enough, not pure enough, not worth passing on. So today, I want to address this idea that you'll, quote, mess up your kids' language development because it often determines whether parents try to pass on another language at all. Then I want to ask an even bigger, more existential question about why we raise bilingual children and what the goals even are that we're striving for. Let me start with 3 observations about parents who doubt their language. The first is grammatical imperfection, missing a tense, using the wrong measure word in Mandarin, conjugating incorrectly in French, using the wrong honorific in Korean, producing a sentence that feels slightly off. The second is vocabulary gaps, whole domains of language that feel like they're simply missing, academic registers, professional vocabulary, regional expressions that were never really a part of your daily life. And the third is mixing, code switching into English mid-sentence because the word will not come or because that's genuinely how you've always spoken in that language. The shame-based interpretation of all 3 is the same. My language is broken. My language is incomplete. And passing it on would do the child a disservice. But it's not a disservice. And here's what the research says instead when a child acquires a language. In the early 1980s, a linguist named Stephen Krashen proposed what he called the input hypothesis, the idea that we acquire language when we receive input we can mostly understand. He called this comprehensible input. Comprehensible, not perfect, comprehensible, not native, and comprehensible, not without accents. Krashen's insight was that language acquisition runs on meaningful, contextually grounded language that connects to others in relationship with the speaker. In other words, the input carries meaning because it is used with another person. So a parent who speaks imperfect Spanish with their child, who mixes in some English, who sometimes reaches for a word and does not quite find it, that parent is providing comprehensible input. The child's brain is making sense of what you're saying because it's connected to you. The child knows that something is being communicated and that it is worth their time and attention. All the technical grammar will develop just fine. Now, I know it's easier said than done, and I need to remind myself of this truth as well. My kids are in Mandarin dual language schools learning Mandarin, which is their heritage language from their mother, but Mandarin is my 3rd language since I started learning in middle school after Cantonese and English at home in Hong Kong. So just the other day, I was communicating with my younger daughter's preschool teacher about picking her up early from school. I was holding her and chatting with the teacher in Mandarin, and I totally kicked myself when I used the wrong verb for pick up. I said 我会拿它 instead of 我会接它. You see, when I speak Mandarin, I'm drawing from Mandarin, English, and Cantonese. In English, na means to get, so it seemed perfectly fine in that split-second moment to say I will get her. So I was using my English brain when I said 我会拿它. It did feel a bit weird, but I let it roll off my tongue anyway. The teacher kindly corrected my verb and said it should be 接. I checked with my Cantonese brain and it made perfect sense. How embarrassing. I would never say 我會攞佢, 攞 meaning 拿 in Cantonese. I would say 我會接佢, 接 meaning 接 in Cantonese. Despite the embarrassment, I laughed it off and thought to myself, great, I'm modeling poor verb choices for my daughter. But then when I think about it, my daughter followed the conversation just fine. So linguistically, I didn't, quote, mess her up. And what she was also following was the way I receive feedback and the way that I internalize mistakes in my language choices. That feels important as her father, which actually relates to a second dimension in raising bilingual kids. You see, input alone does not capture the full picture. Another body of research places parents in a position that no other input source can occupy. Dr. Bonny Norton is a professor and researcher at the University of British Columbia, whose work on identity and language learning has been foundational in the field. Her argument is that language acquisition is fundamentally an act of identity investment. We acquire languages we are motivated to acquire, languages that are connected to relationships we value, communities we want to belong to, identities we want to inhabit. Now think about what a parent or caregiver offers that no other input source can. A tutor can provide grammar practice, an immersion school can provide more hours of exposure, an app can provide vocabulary practice, but none of them can provide what a parent or caregiver provides, which is the sense that this language is where you come from, that it is the language of the people who love you most. Norton's research shows that identity investment is one of the most powerful drivers of language acquisition. A parent who speaks imperfect Vietnamese or Portuguese or Catalan with love and consistency is providing something that has no substitute. And this is where I want to say something about accents, because I think we don't realize how quickly we disqualify ourselves because of our accents. When a parent speaks a language with an accent shaped by years of living between two languages, that accent is actually proof of living a bilingual life. It signals this person has navigated more than one linguistic world, more than one cultural reality, more than one version of themselves, and that is truly something to honor and not hide. The shame around accents runs deep, particularly for heritage speakers and immigrants, because accents have historically been used to mark people as foreign, as lesser, as not quite belonging because they don't speak in the same way as the dominant and more powerful people group. But from a language identity perspective, when your child hears your accent, they are hearing what it sounds like to live between languages with enough commitment that both of them have left a mark on how you speak. So when the shame about your accent shows up, and it will, I want you to consider this. The shame you carry about your language, if it goes unaddressed, is the inheritance your child receives about their own language. A parent who speaks with confidence, even imperfectly, even with an accent, teaches their child that they can be confident in their languages. A parent who apologizes for their language teaches their child that it is worth apology. And a parent who goes silent teaches their child that it is worth silence or not worth speaking. The shame is the thing to address. Imperfection is the thing to own, like me when I use the wrong Chinese verb. Still, I want to bring in one final body of research that addresses the idea that gaps in my language will become the gaps in my child's language, that imperfect input produces imperfect output. Jim Cummins' research, which I introduced back in episode 1, gives us a powerful image for this. He called it the common underlying proficiency. The idea is that even though our languages may sound completely different on the surface, what we hear is just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath the surface, languages share far more than we realize. The linguistic structures, the cognitive frameworks, the logic that holds a language together, these are not stored separately for each language. They're actually forming a shared foundation that all of your languages draw from. What this means practically is that even if you model inconsistent or messy Hindi to your child, their Hindi will still be strengthened by everything they already know in English. The linguistic rules transfer across the system. A child who already understands how stories are structured, how arguments are built, how questions work, how adjectives describe nouns, brings all of that knowledge to every language that they encounter. So here's what I want you to hold on to from this research. Language learning is complex, and any input and exposure helps. Imperfect input is still input. Messy, accented input from someone your child loves is still one of the most powerful things you can offer. The iceberg runs deep, so trust what's underneath. Speaking of icebergs, let's get deeper in this conversation and consider what our goals are as parents of emerging multilingual children. Often we think that the goal of bilingual parenting is to produce a perfectly fluent bilingual child. But is that actually a realistic goal, or even the right goal? The ideal of perfect bilingualism, of having equal fluency in both languages where native speakers of each language would assume you're from there, is what Valdez and Figueroa called a fiction. And the harm of this fictitious ideal is that it defines success in purely linguistic terms, making parents feel inadequate if they don't have, quote, perfect linguistic skills to pass on. In other words, it reduces the entire project of bilingual family living to a proficiency question. Are they fluent enough? And if they're not, then what's the point? Why not abandon the bilingual project altogether? So let me offer additional perspective of what I think we are doing when we raise bilingual children for bilingual living. You are working with a child who can sit across from their grandmother and understand her, who can hear a story from your childhood told in the language it happened in, who knows in their body that they belong to something larger than the English-speaking world around them, who is legible in more than one language, more than one culture, more than one way of being human. And that is an identity goal, a belonging goal. And it is, I would argue, just as important, if not more important, than whether your child can one day write an academic paper in Spanish or Arabic or Russian. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but is that actually the point? For me, I want to cultivate language belonging in my two girls, the sense that these languages are mine, that I am at home in them, that they are part of who I am, not a skill I perform for an examiner or a standard I am perpetually falling short of by monolingual standards. I would also argue that language belonging is what survives the years when children resist the home language. It's what pulls young adults back to language classrooms when they're ready. It's what allows a person to call their grandfather and share about their life journey on the phone 10 years later. So I believe that standing firmly against the ideal of perfect bilingualism is central to the project. Refuse to pass on shame and embarrassment. Carry your language with dignity, with accent, with, quote, imperfection, but carry it with your head up high. 你嘅語言係你身份嘅一部分，帶住佢，昂首挺胸. Here is the reframe. The deficit narrative says, my language is not good enough to pass on. The research says, your language in your voice with your accent, your history, and your connection is what your child needs to feel belonging to a language. And language belonging is what makes language learning sustainable. Embracing your accent is one of the most tangible and powerful steps forward in owning your bilingual identity and bilingual parenting identity. It is an act of refusal, a refusal to accept the hierarchy that placed native-sounding languages above the sound of a life lived between languages. And ultimately, bilingualism will be a gift to your child to know who they are in more than one language, who carry more than one world inside them, who have access for the rest of their lives to the people and the stories and the histories that live in their languages. Now that is a beautiful inheritance. I hope this episode gives you permission to speak your languages with your head up. Next episode, we look at the fear that time spent on the home language is time taken away from English, as if the two are in competition. The research on this is just as clear, and I think you will find it as freeing as what we covered today. If this episode spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Language belonging does not have to stop with your family, and there's no room for the paralyzing shame of not speaking a language perfectly. I'm Dr. Kevin Wong, Wong Home and Boxy. Thank you so much for listening to the Bilingual Professor podcast. Hatsi Gina.